Zach Servideo from Boston Speaks Up. I'm here with the sponsor read. Silicon Valley Bank is a proud sponsor of Boston Speaks Up for more than 35 years. Silicon Valley Bank has helped innovative companies and their investors move bold ideas forward fast. SVB provides targeted financial services and expertise through its offices at 53 State Street in downtown Boston and in Newton, and innovation centers around the world. With commercial, international, and private banking services, SVB helps address the unique needs of Boston's innovators. Learn more at svb.com. Zach Servideo here from Boston Speaks Up, and I'm here with 3Point Foundation founder, Neil Jacobs. Hi, Neil. Thanks for joining us today.
It's great to be here.
I'm going to read a brief intro on some of your background, so listeners know whom you are as we kind of kick into the conversation. So Neil Jacobs is the president and founder of 3Point Foundation, a nonprofit organization that offers free educational, sports, and dance programming to underserved youth in Boston. Jacobs is responsible for the overall management and strategic direction of 3Point. Previously, Jacobs served as outside team counsel for the Boston Celtics for 30 years, making it no surprise that 3Point Foundation is a community partner of the Boston Celtics Shamrock Foundation. A retired partner of the WilmerHale law firm, Jacobs has spent decades involved in numerous education and basketball programs for youth. Now serving more than 250 students, 3Point runs after-school programs in Boston K-8 schools and operates summer programming at 2 locations. And as we'll discuss, 3Point's model has shifted virtual due to the pandemic. So Neil, thank you for joining us. I think at the top, just in your own words, could you give a brief sort of overview and description of what 3Point Foundation is, what you're offering to students, and then also just speak freely, like how is that manifesting virtually during the pandemic that we're all facing here in 2020?
The 3Point Foundation was started 9 years ago. The mission of the foundation is to try to close the opportunity and achievement gap for underserved, economically disadvantaged youth of color. 3Point has evolved over the 9 years. We started out as a after-school program and a summer program, which did an academic program that focused on reading and math skills, and we combined that with an athletic program. The importance of athletics in our program, particularly basketball, can't really be overstated. It allows 3Point to draw a much broader range of students than would ordinarily sign up or be interested in after-school programming. And it allows us to use sports, which is particularly basketball, which is really popular in the Roxbury, Dorchester neighborhoods and schools in which we work, to teach life lessons that can be learned through basketball and learned through sports. And 3Point works really hard to have a curriculum that where the basketball portion reinforces the classroom learning that's going on. Now, as I said, over time, we moved from providing substantive learning in English and math to project-based learning. And we did that because we wanted to move into programming that would be relevant to our students, both in terms of the subject matter and in terms of culturally what was happening in their communities. and which would allow us not to replicate what was happening during the school day, but would allow us to have a different learning experience that would engage students after school, and allow us to work with them on developing 21st century skills, help foster social emotional growth, and help develop a growth mindset, which are actually the best predictors of success in later life, both in school, in jobs, and in the community. The 21st century skills we focus on are problem solving, critical thinking, communication, and collaboration. And if you think about the skills you use every day in your job, and most people use in navigating the world, people who are can excel in those areas generally succeed. On the social emotional side, the real issue for a lot of the kids we deal with, because their experience is often limited to their neighborhoods, is getting a sense of self-awareness, social awareness, and how to make disciplined decisions and successfully manage themselves to accomplish goals that they set for themselves. And, growth mindset it focuses on encouraging students to be willing to take risks and seeing failure not as something disappointing, but rather as a natural thing that occurs and allows you to build skills. So that's what 3Point has become today. We're focused on project-based learning. We use basketball and now dance, which we introduced a couple of years ago to involve more girls in the program, to reinforce what we're trying to teach, which is a set of skills that supplement what the Boston Public Schools are teaching during the school day substantively.
That's great.
If that makes sense to you.
That's a wonderful sort of overview of 3Point. What are some of the schools? Can you sort of name drop like some of the schools that you're working with, and like do you have like a direct relationship with Boston Public Schools? But what are some of the communities that
we have a direct relationship with Boston Public Schools. Some of the schools that we're in, and for example, in the Sarah Greenwood School, which is a K through 8 school, we work with students in grades 5 through 8 after school and in our summer program. The schools we work with are kind of clustered together. There's the Martin Luther King School, which is also a Dorchester school, and the Hernandez School. We do one charter school, Roxbury Prep. We're at the Henderson Inclusion School, where we work with some of our students are on the spectrum and have. It's a school that includes students with disabilities and brings them into mainstream learning. So those are kind of an example of the schools that we work with in the K through 8 and some middle schools. But our focus is grades 5 through 8. That's what we have decided intentionally to focus on, because that's an area that, in terms of government programming, those grades receive the least attention. That is, early education gets extraordinary amount of funding and a lot of programs in early education. A high school group gets a tremendous amount of programming and funding through different sources. And it's the middle schools that tend to not have as much of a focus. And from a pedagogical perspective, it's the grades 5 through 8 that sort of direction. That's when children start to be able to think about thinking and think about learning. And it's where a lot of decisions start to be made that really affect the outcome of whether a child graduates from high school and whether a child goes to college. So we're focused on that group intentionally.
That's interesting. And I recall from chatting with you when we first spoke, maybe it was probably more than a month back, that what these schools have in common, these sort of K through 8 schools, but specifically sort of grades 5 through 8, is that and you kind of you just hit on this. There's an under investment in recreational sports. Certainly, basketball and dance would be on that list of things that aren't offered. And so is it a safe assumption to make that the schools that you're particularly focused on are the ones that don't have these after school activities, these recreational activities where some others do? And so you can kind of come in and sort of augment, existing programs and perhaps a lack thereof, at those schools, and then also bring some cohesion to the community more broadly, right? And like help those sort of disparate schools actually have a sense of connectivity to each other, just beyond their individual school, each individual school itself.
I think that's right. They are connected sort of geographically. There are neighborhoods that abut each other. But the focus on K through 8 is that particular kind of school, there are more than a dozen of them in Boston, that particular kind of school often doesn't have a large upper school, 6th through 8th grade, number of students compared to a middle school. So there might be 70 to 90 students in a K through 8 school in those grades 6 through 8. And if you went to a middle school, which is focused exclusively in grades 6 through 8, there are probably more like 400 students in that middle school. So when Boston sets up after-school sports and recreational leagues, the K through 8 schools often really don't have enough students to participate in those leagues. And it's a function of school structure, not it's not the intent of BPS to leave them out. But as a matter of school structure, it's very difficult to form teams that can compete if you have 30 boys or 30 girls versus a school that has 200 boys and 200 girls. It's tough to run those schools against each other in a basketball program. So one of the things we did is we went to, and this is with support from the Boston Public Schools Athletic Department, is we have gone to K through 8 schools that don't have after-school basketball programs, don't have after-school athletics. They're not in any of the middle school leagues. And we've created, in addition to the after-school programming, a basketball league for them. So these schools compete against each other. It's kind of the smaller school league you might think of. It's sort of like the NESCAC in college. They're smaller schools. Yeah. And they compete against each other in basketball. And so we run that programming in the schools, and the students who are in our program then form basketball teams which have a season and playoffs, and we run the league in both the fall and spring terms, and we're not conflicting with the BPS middle school leagues because we're within schools that don't have basketball. You're right, there's an added dimension of we're bringing something to the school and to the children in that school that opportunities they otherwise wouldn't have. And that's one of the reasons that sports is so important, and basketball in particular, to what we do. And that's been the biggest thing that's been affected, that the pandemic has affected in our programming, is we can't run a basketball program in person.
Right. That was going to be my follow-up question is what's it like right now?
Yeah, it wouldn't be safe. And we follow the decisions of the mayor and the Boston Public Schools about access to young people. So we ended up, to keep basketball alive, creating on our virtual programming basketball challenges. And there are things that students can do in their apartments, in their homes, when we were in lockdown, without going outside. Now we have drills and other things students can do that individually outside, and we encourage them to we create a challenge, like how many times can you do a figure eight through your legs with a basketball in 30 seconds? And we encourage them to have someone take videos of them doing it, and they submit their videos to our site, and we post videos and have winners of the challenge.
That's great.
So we're trying to engage the students the best way we can in basketball, work on skills, work on drills that are COVID-19 compliant, and give them a way to stay connected to our coaches and to each other through basketball without actually playing the game. Now, to be clear, that's not satisfactory. Right? I mean, there's nothing.
Right.
It doesn't replace adequately to actually being out in the court, being with a coach, being with teammates,
interacting with the team, right?
So but it's the best we can do under the circumstances.
Source of sort of not only sort of curriculum and sort of like the frameworks that have matured with 3Point, but also sort of provided some of the support network that is helping sort of nurture these 250 plus students virtually right now. And is there would you like to sort of expand on any of that a little bit more?
Yeah, let me take it in two parts, Zach. One is what is developed at UMass Boston. The second, what virtual programming is like.
Sure.
At UMass Boston, we today have a memorandum of understanding, which makes us a signature program for the College of Education and Human Development. But to understand that, I have to go back to our program design, which is we have a teacher that is establishing a framework for the students to look at and develop their own projects to work on. As part of that framework, the teacher acts more as a facilitator, not as a lecturer. And the students end up working in small groups, usually groups of 3 or 4. A UMass Boston student is in the classroom with the little pods of 3 and 4 to help and facilitate with those students their research, analysis, project development. Those students from UMass Boston play a critical role in our program design because most of those students are from the neighborhoods that the kids are from, and our students are from. And they are role models, mentors, and they're, from our students' perspective, these are really authentic people. They are teachers, mentors who come from the community and have gotten to the point of success of being at UMass Boston. So there's a whole connection there that's incredibly important to us in terms of the development of the youth we teach. Mm-hmm. At the same time, it turns out, and this was, an unexpected, unanticipated consequence, that for the UMass students, and there are roughly 3 to 5 in a classroom, for those students, this is an incredible learning experience. They're getting, coming from the School of Education, they're getting to learn about the Boston Public Schools. Mm-hmm. They're getting introduced to the principals of those schools. But most importantly, they're working with students and getting to see what it's like to work with students from the Roxbury-Dorchester area. So if they make decisions to go back and teach in Boston, they're informed about what that teaching experience is like. And very close relationships, professional but close, meaningful, develop between the UMass Boston students and the young people that they work with. At some point, the dean, a guy named Joe Berger at UMass Boston, at the College of Education, said, we ought to offer working in 3Point as a program that counts towards what is known as pre-practicum hours, which is something that a college student has to obtain to get their license. So we now are running two programs. One at UMass Boston that helps students gain the hours and have the learning experience they need to become great teachers, and the program we run for our youth in the Boston public schools. There's a very formal. It's again completely unanticipated consequence, and the UMass Boston has stepped up in a huge way to support 3Point by encouraging their students to participate in our program and giving some credit for what the students do in our program. Now, when we go virtual, and we went virtual in March when we had the school shut down. Mm-hmm. We started. It took us 1 week to create a virtual online program, and then we had to keep improving it. But we were providing programming about 6 weeks before BPS formally began providing programming in a institutional way. And what we found out really quickly is it's much harder to do virtual programming, both from the student's perspective and from the program's perspective, to make it impactful and meaningful. And it requires far more resources from the program to make it impactful and meaningful for the student. And we started out, as you mentioned, first there's just a problem that's a technology problem, which is, do the students have Wi-Fi in their homes? Mm-hmm. And do they have the hardware that's going to let them get online to learn? And all of our programming is done in a way that we want students to use their laptops, but if there's a problem, a student can use his or her telephone mm-hmm. and get on our programming and participate. So we had to find technologies that were phone-friendly as well as hardware-friendly, or as well as, phone-friendly, as well as being friendly for laptops. And then what we found is that, as everyone, I'm repeating something which we've all learned at this point, students have a limited tolerance for sitting in front of a screen, that the formats for learning have to be interactive to really keep the student engaged. So you need breakout rooms, challenges, and you have to break up the formatting. It can't be a Zoom speaking head. You need videos, music, anything that will move the programming along, but breaks up what the student's actually seeing and participating in. And that requires much more staffing and much more planning than in-person programming. So for example, we run breakout rooms in all of our sessions so that if we have basketball coaches and we're going to run a breakout session with the basketball coaches, instead of having one coach work with a basketball team, which is what we normally would do in person, we have 3 or 4 coaches who take the breakout rooms and are working with students in small groups. The irony is that at a time when it's much more difficult to raise funds for nonprofits, because rightly so, or I should say for nonprofits like ours, because I think rightly so, people are focused on COVID and they're focused on issues that relate to social justice and systemic issues. And some of the traditional programs, which I would argue are also focused on systemic issues, have been pushed to the back in the fundraising queue.
Right.
So at a time when it's more difficult for an after-school program to raise funds, the costs go up. The costs are much greater in that environment. So there is kind of a irony to that another unintended, unforeseen consequence that we've had to deal with. But we have. Our supporters have been very generous, and we're able to keep the programming we need to keep in order to impact and engage with our students who need more help now more than ever, we will keep that programming current, interesting, fully relevant, and engaged with the students. So we're very happy about that.
How have you found race to be, a factor in 3Point's sort of evolution, and how is race relations in the Black Lives Matter movement this year sort of intertwined? And in a romantic sense, my hope would be almost like accelerated, like the momentum of what 3Points has built. So I know that's kind of like a large sort of monologue I just delivered on sort of race in the country right now, and how 3Point sort of responds to a lot of the diversity and equity and inclusion improvements we need in society. But just speak freely on that topic, and if you could give any sort of examples, anecdotes from over the years, things you've learned. Like, I'd love to learn from you. I'd love for listeners and sort of the broader public to kind of get an understanding of like what it's been like for 3Point Foundation, and then also sort of like a look toward, like, given what you've learned, like what's ahead.
Well, you did pack a lot into that. Your monologue on different questions and different issues. Let me take up a few of them, and if I miss something, feel free to draw my attention back to it.
Sure.
In today's environment and the actual program delivery, almost everybody at 3Point, with the exception of me, comes from the community, and they're people of color. So there's never at the student level or the school level a question of sort of authenticity or any kind of distrust that there might be, some other motive. And our curriculum, so that's the people side. On the curriculum side, what we've done, because we create our curriculum, Joan Archer creates the curriculum every term, is as the social justice issues that we're talking about became prevalent, we focused our students with the scaffolding we erected for the projects they were going to work on, was topics like communicating for social change. And we asked students to look at their community and things that they'd like to see different, whether are systemic problems, how they'd like to see them addressed. And they did a lot of research, a lot of mapping of what assets exist in the city, and they got to interview, and in part this was because of the pandemic, because we were virtual, they got to interview city leaders and get their views about how systemic issues could be addressed. They interviewed Kim Janey, from president of the city council, Andrea Campbell. They introduced Nora Baston, the superintendent from the Boston Police. They interviewed they interviewed some of the Celtics players. Enes Kanter came on and spoke with our kids about social justice and his experience in Turkey. And systemic problems. And so they were working, the curriculum was working on the very issues that everyone's focused on right now. And the students were asked at the end of their research and analysis to create videos that would show their solutions, address problems, and create podcasts. I don't think they're at the sophisticated level that they're competing with you yet, but they're creating podcasts on these issues. And so substantively, we are current. We're looking at what are the issues in the community, and we always look at what are the issues in the community the students want to address, and ask them to pick issues that they're interested in, work on those issues, and come up with projects at the end that they can present to a knowledgeable audience. And they do. And there's outstanding work done by this group of students. So in terms of kind of like our authenticity and our currentness and our focus, we're at the leading edge of that. 3Point's an opportunity priority partner of BPS, which is a designation that only a few programs get, and it means that you've sort of been vetted and the quality of your program is extremely high, and you're one of the few programs eligible for city funding. And similarly, in the summer, we're designated as a Summer Learning Academy, which again is a quality endorsement by the BPS and by Boston After School and beyond. So we moved past that. But, I think the way I deal with it today is 3Point has nothing, it's not about me. It's about kids. It's about people from the community. It's about the community helping themselves within the community. And I was just a facilitator that kind of brought all the different forces together. I had foot in different camps. I was, a lawyer in a large law firm representing the Boston Celtics, and that's one camp. And at the same time, I now have, deep and abiding relationships and friends who are from Roxbury and Dorchester and are highly respected people in that community. So that's the thing I think I bring, which is this being able to bring assets from other places in my life to help underserved kids, and that's what I'm trying to do now.
Cheers, Boston.